All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Moses Kusisira, and I'm the CEO of Social Media Gateways Inc. Today we are talking about supporting aggregators in Mojaloop. Quick background, we've worked with Mojaloop for a couple of years, one of the functionality that we've been working on is split payment. And split payment has evolved, since we started working with Mojaloop on it. And so it has evolved to even be able to accept aggregators. And so now we're going to talk about how can we have aggregators in Mojaloop, right? And what are the benefits to decide if we should have it in Mojaloop or not. So there are a couple of things to think about when we talk about aggregators. The first thing is, will we need more features within Mojaloop itself to be able to handle aggregators? And the second question is, will these features allow the participants to have parallel offerings within Mojaloop itself? And lastly, can we reduce cost for everybody, basically without stifling innovation? The answer to the first question, absolutely, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on the extra features that we might need within the Mojaloop scheme itself. And then to the second question, given the right access, most definitely as well. Again, we'll talk about this and go through each one of this scenario, to see how it can work together. And then lastly, that is, I will also need that as well. And today we'll show you how, again, we'll go through each and every step here to kind of like, showcase how aggregators can, if they join the Mojaloop scheme, how we can make it more easier than, when it's outside Mojaloop itself. So basically our conclusion is we need to extend Mojaloop to support aggregators like Snap, and we'll talk about what, different kind of aggregators, because there's quite a few out there. We need to be able to provide new service with significant benefits to the customer. We need to be able to support competition between operators, and if we have the aggregator capability within Mojaloop, this will be able to provide different competitors to be able to use the same functionality. We need to increase throughput through Mojaloop system. It will make it easier for everybody if everything goes through Mojaloop, and it'll be standard for everybody. So what's an aggregator? So an aggregator, as we define it in Mojaloop, is basically a person that an entity that's permitted to request payments from other participants or other a payer's DFSP, right? They are also permitted to obtain customer authorization to be able to get accounts from those payees or those participants. If required, in the case of like Snap, the organization need to be able to split payment from one payer to different payees, right? And in this scenario, think about marketplace that basically sells tickets for, let's say, soccer team. And we'll talk about that and go through it. So when the payer comes in, they pay a ticket one time, let's say 100 Tanzanian shillings. And then that payment is supposed to be split into 3 different entities or 3 different vendors. And we'll show that as a use case. Also, issue payment requests directly to the payee DFSP, and then be able to support all or nothing transfers and any or many transfers. Again, this is where you have the marketplaces where people can also buy a bunch of different things from different vendors, within the marketplace itself. And lastly, pay bills on behalf of the customer and receive confirmation that their accounts were credited. And we will talk a little bit more about that as well. The participant in Mojaloop scheme who's not required, basically the aggregator has to be a direct participant in settlement. It doesn't have to be a direct participant in settlement. The settlement happens between the payer and the payee's DFSP. So the aggregator does not have to be, part of that whole sequence. And they have to rely on pre-existing relationship between the customers, DFSPs, and the recipients, DFSPs, or the payee's DFSPs. So what sort of entities are like aggregators? We believe that there's way more than this, but these are the few that we are going to list. And so, an entity that does traditional billing aggregation, think of it where a customer comes in to pay, let's say, for their power, to be able to pay for hospital bills or water bill in one place, one aggregated place, right? Those entities, they qualify as aggregators. Entities who accept payments which need to be dispersed across multiple beneficiaries. Again, this is the example where with SNAP, one person buys a ticket, but that the payment that's made is split out to different entities on the other side. Also, entities that act as marketplace managers. Again, this is the any of many example. Think of it as buying an item from an entity like Amazon, but that item has bits and pieces from different vendors. So, to the payer, it's only one payment, but different vendors are getting a portion of that specific payment. And then entities which provide bulk services like payrolls, these are also might be considered as aggregators. And we believe there's more, but these are the specific ones that we'll talk about today. What would an aggregator use case look like? So the example I gave before, which was the buying of the ticket, this is a use case that we've been talking about for a while. Basically, the idea is that the user will pay a one-time payment of, let's say, 1,000 shillings, 1,000 Tanzanian shillings. And 10% of that amount, basically, the aggregator or the marketplace company or organization will keep as a commission. 10% of that will go to the government as a tax, and then 80% of that amount will go to the football team. So here, the switch basically needs to be able to handle the any non-environment where if one of them fails, then the whole transaction fails. But if all of them go through, then it will come back and confirm that it went through, and then the aggregator at that point will issue the ticket once the confirmation has already been confirmed through the system. And here is where I pass it to Mike, more complex.
Thank you very much. Okay, so this is what we think a transaction request for the payment that we've just looked at might look like. It's a simple JSON request, and well, slightly more complicated than we're used to, but let's just go through the parts of it and then we can understand in a bit more detail how it works. Next slide, please, Moses. So it sends to a virtual DFSP. This is really the switch, but we're calling it bulk processor. We imagine, as I say, that there will be an independent service running as part of the Mojaloop switch, which will handle these processes. Next slide. We specify in the commitment rule item whether this is an all or nothing payment or not. And if it is specified as an all or nothing payment, every part must succeed for the whole transfer to succeed. If any part fails, the whole transfer is rolled back. Next slide. And we also specify that we want abbreviated information to the payer. And what this means is that although 3 payments are being made, we want the payer just to see a single payment. So it just says to them, I paid 1,000 shillings to Snap. They don't want to see that actually only 100 of that went to Snap. Sorry, they don't want to see that 100 went to Snap, 100 to the government, and 800 to the football team. They just want to see a single payment on their statement. Next slide, please. We don't need to specify at this point which DFSP owns the customer. We will allow the switch to sort that out. And we don't specify the total payer amount. We calculate that from the payee amounts, from summing them up. Next slide, please. And we will support any number of payees. So at the moment, we're using it for a relatively restricted number, just 3 payees. But in the future, we envisage that for things like payrolls, there might be a large number of payees that could be supported using this. Next slide, please. And again, we allow the switch to identify the participants who own the payee accounts. Again, if it can't identify them, because this is an all or nothing payment, the payment will be rejected. If it were an any of many payment and it couldn't identify one of the payees, the other payees would still get paid. So that's the difference between those two types of payments. And it means that it's not a problem for us to allow the switch to do the identification. Next slide, please. So how does this go through then? Well, the switch checks which participants own the payer identifier and each of the payee identifiers. If any of them can't be identified, in this case, as we've said, switch responds to the aggregator with an error and the transfer request is cancelled. Now, these are just using standard switch functionality. Next slide. Now, the switch calculates the total payment which the payer will need to make, in this case, 1,000 shillings. And it generates a transaction request for the payer DFSP to make a payment of the total amount to the aggregator. And that means that the transfer will show up correctly in the customer statements. It will say, I paid 1,000 shillings to Snap. The payer DFSP now requests a quotation from the PISP. Okay, it's important to recognize this is being routed through the PISP at the moment. Next slide. For each of the payees, the switch generates a quotation request for a transfer from the PISP to the recipient account. It stores the response together with the condition that was generated. And if any of them are rejected, the switch rejects the original quotation request from the payer DFSP, and it rejects the original transaction request from the PISP. But if they're all accepted, the switch can now accept or send an acceptance on the payer DFSP's quotation request. Again, this is existing functionality. Next slide, please. There are some open questions, particularly to do with what conditions should be attached and whether that condition should be a composition of the conditions returned by the payee DFSPs, but we'll leave those open for the moment. Next slide, please. Now we go to the transfer request. The payer DFSP requests a transfer to the aggregator, and the switch reserves the DFSP's funds in the normal way. The switch constructs transfer requests to each of the payee DFSPs based on the quotation responses they gave, and the switch requests each payee not to clear that payment until it receives confirmation. Now, this is new functionality because the payee DFSPs must take notice of the switch's instruction not to clear the funds until confirmation is given. Next slide, please. Question is, who should the payer DFSP in this request be in this request and in the original request for a quotation, but we'll leave that open for the moment. Next slide. So each DFSP responds to the switch with success or failure, and after they've all responded, the switch registers the transfers in its ledgers. The payer DFSP is debited with the total amount, and each payee DFSP is credited with its portion of the transfer. The switch then sends confirmation to the payee DFSPs that they can clear the funds to their account holders and confirms to the payer DFSP that its transfer has succeeded. Now it can confirm to the PISP that its transfer request, which is still open, has now succeeded. So this is new functionality in the switch. but the DFSP functionality works in the same way as it did. Next slide, please. And now I'm going to hand back to Moses, who will talk briefly about how we would look at confirming bill payments.
Thank you, Michael. All right, so what is our definition of bill payments? Basically, it's an organization that provides a customer who want to pay. The customer wants to pay an organization with whom they have or the person they represent as an account. They will specify the account at the organization, and the way they want to pay. They're not very interested in crediting the organization's a bank or account, but they are interested in having their account credited. So in other words, they pay through the organization or the aggregator, and they're paying for let's say a power bill. What they're really more worried about is, or what they want to make sure that happens is that that payment is credited to their account, but they really don't necessarily care if that amount is credited to the utilities DFSP account. So the question basically, how should we handle this type of organization or this type of institution within Mojaloop? And our proposal is we have to basically add a couple functionality within the Mojaloop scheme, directly within the Mojaloop scheme, and be able to allow these entities, the aggregators that will be doing bill payment, to directly connect to the Mojaloop scheme. This way, it's all done within Mojaloop itself. They only need to support a very lightweight interface that has two parts to it. And the first part is basically they need to be able to request to pay. So receive a request to pay to a customer's account that they own, authentication nomination of their account that will be credited. So they need to also be able to respond to that request with a confirmation that the customer account actually exists, right? And that will be done within the request to pay functionality. And the second functionality will be payment confirmation. They need to be able to receive a request to credit the nominated customer account. So, once the customer pays, and they need to be able to receive a confirmation to actually credit that specific account. And then they need to respond to that request with a confirmation, because then the customer who paid, they need to have a confirmation that they actually paid and the account was credited. And that's something that we believe, if it's added within the Mojaloop scheme, will really make this work. We will allow the switch aggregator service to generate these requests and confirmation as part of their management of their aggregator request, and will allow aggregators to specify this functionality as part of the to the aggregator service. And the idea here is being able to make it flawless, and easier for aggregators to simply connect to the Mojaloop scheme itself directly. And if we do that, then and have this two functionality or two interfaces in there, it will make it so much easier, for the aggregators, because the aggregators, they'll only concentrate on the experience part, and let the moving of the funds and confirmation or communication between the DFSPs and the utility companies be handled within Mojaloop itself. And that's it from me. I hope we made the time. We did.
Thanks. Sorry, can I just add one thing, Moses?
Yes.
Which I wanted to bring out, which is that this will allow the utilities and government departments and anybody who's interested in receiving bill payments to participate directly in the Mojaloop schemes in a very lightweight way. So instead of having to do that, as happens now, by attaching to DFSPs and allowing the DFSPs to do it, they will be able to attach directly and manage bill payments themselves without needing to worry about connections being made by one or more DFSPs in order to do that.